The reason for this film is kind of unique, actually. A number of years ago, we were making a kung fu video game. So we were looking for an artist to do some hand-drawn art panels that we would put into the game, and we learned about Daxiong. He was living in New York at the time, and he had drawn Justice League comics, Star Wars comics, and he had also worked with Jin Yong, the leading kung fu novelist in China. So we thought he'd be a great fit, and we brought him up to our studio in Toronto, and we were working together. And that's where we learned Daxiong came from the same hometown as my wife and producing partner, Masha Loftus. So even though my wife was from the same hometown, she had a very different experience. She was the daughter of a government official in China, and she had never had any connection with any dissident groups or persecuted groups while she was living there. So meeting Daxiong and meeting people who were from her own city who had suffered this, and this was taking place in her hometown under her nose, but people weren't told about it, that really hit home for her. And she felt this was a story that really had to be told for the Chinese people. When I was in high school, I had a fascination with Eastern philosophy and meditation. And I had encountered Falun Gong in the late 90s before there was a persecution in China. So in 1999, when the Communist Party banned Falun Gong and began persecuting it, I was still in high school, and I remember hearing this narrative from China. I knew very little about Chinese politics, but they were saying that Falun Gong was evil and dangerous, and they needed to get rid of it. And I just could not reconcile what I was hearing with my own experiences with the practice and with the community. They were completely contradictory. So that sparked an interest for me in the human rights in China, and in particular with the persecution of Falun Gong. Finally, it's also related to the artistic inspiration. So in our company, we make different types of media. We make video games. We also make documentaries and animation. And I feel that often we have very limited notions about what animation can do. We think about it as being for children and not being very serious. But I really feel that animation and art has a power to communicate very important stories. And it can be used to communicate things and help us to understand in a very unique way. So I was very interested in a film where we had an artist who had a personal trauma and separated from his home, and to explore how art could be a part of that story and how the creative process could help him to understand and to heal. There were many challenges. I think the biggest, there's a couple, one in the artistic side of things and one in the sort of outside of the creative process. First, from an artistic standpoint, animation and documentary are very different mediums. Usually in animation, you would finalize your script before you begin doing any animation. You'd lock your script, you'd have a storyboard for every shot, and then you'd build from those storyboards a kind of video out of storyboards. They call it an animatic or a Leica reel. And you would do all that before you begin work on the animation, because it's very time consuming and expensive. In documentaries, it's the opposite. You usually just go shoot 100 hours of footage. You don't know what the story is. And then you sit in the editing suite later and you start carving it up. And you find the story from that process. So we wanted to have the animation, but we also wanted to observe. We wanted to just let it happen and see what was happening and see Daxiong creating. So that meant we were animating things and we didn't know what the story was yet. We didn't know where it was going to end up in the film. And this was a big leap of faith. But only because of that, we were able to pull the curtain back and show the audience the artistic process that Daxiong was involved in, and how this impacted the other survivors who were sharing their stories, and how it helped him to come to some understanding. So this was from the artistic side of things. But aside from the artistic challenges, this film had other particular challenges, which is related to the sensitivity of dealing with human rights in China. When I was told by other people that you should be careful with this type of thing, you know that it's a very sensitive issue, but when something happens, then it really hits home for you. So the video game we were making with Daxiong was actually being published by Tencent, which is a major media company in China. And as we were making this film, Tencent was launching the game, and then it disappeared from the store.
Oh.
So our game disappeared from the storefronts in China, and when we reached our rep at Tencent, we were told that the Chinese government had visited them and asked them to cut ties with our company. They said it's not an issue of the game. And they asked me, Are you doing something not aligned with the Chinese government direction? And at that time, the Public Security Bureau began contacting the relatives of my wife and producing partner who were still living in China. And they were telling them they know what we're up to overseas. So using this as a kind of threat to see if they could intimidate us. So we face these pressures in telling this story. But at the same time, we meet people like Daxiong and the many survivors in this film. And what they have gone through is so much more than the pressure that we faced. So my wife, Masha, we were very adamant that we needed to tell this story despite the pressures. It's an important story.
我知道看了一个电影之后，大家会感觉心情比较沉重。但是呢，今天我很高兴的，我有一个这样的翻译。我的名字叫大熊，我觉得我这个翻译的名字应该叫机器猫。在接触这些人的时候呢，其实是寻找一些我们过去的故事和我们过去的一些走过的路。但是呢，我又重新看到了这些人。重新看到这些人，我们会在同样的人，但是会在不同的场景下，这种感觉是很奇妙的一种感觉，就是我们在演一出戏，只是舞台的背景换了，好像故事的情节还在继续。这个故事发生在20年前。在20年前，我相信每个人经历的20年都会经历很多事情，但是当我们在见到的时候，我觉得我们发现我们人生中总是有一条暗暗的线在始终延续着，就是这样的一种感觉。包括今天，我觉得我好像又重新认识到了这些，包括你们在座的各位都是故事里的人，我们都在演着同样的故事。他问我的问题，他问到了一个法轮功的问题。其实在30年前，在我最接触法轮功的时候，我不知道会有今天这样的一个结果。那时候我是一个20多岁的小伙子，我觉得法轮功可能对我来讲更多的是一种祛病健身，是一种体育锻炼。那么可能今天社会很多人会认为它是一种宗教或者是一个什么政治团体，但是我想那个时候不会想这么多，它就是一个体育运动，是一个能够有益身心的一种体育。因为它不像其他宗教有什么这个教堂有佛有寺庙，它只有找人出去锻炼身体，你能说它是一个宗教吗？但是后来在99年开始迫害的时候，其实我是有选择，就是说我应该做一个怎么样的人。如果说法轮功是一种信仰的话，我想那之后我就觉得它是一种信仰，就是信仰我心中所坚持的这种正义，而并没因为外界环境的变化而做我讨厌的人。所以说，如果问我这个电影最想表达什么，我想表达，也20年前有这么一群年轻人，他们在追求这种正义的道路上，有的人死掉了，有的人为此付出了进了监狱。我希望这个世界上的人都去珍惜这些少年人的那种美好的理想。今天我是一个幸运的人，我坐在这里，但是也有很多人，他们不能出现在这里的人，其实还有很多，在中国社会，我想在世界各个角落都有很多这样的人。
I mean, from the beginning, the inspiration from the art style was to keep it as close as possible to what is coming from Daxiong's pen. So the challenge with this is that Daxiong, you can see if you watch him draw in real time, he can create vivid, beautiful drawings just like this, but they are two-dimensional, they're flat. And so the biggest challenge was how to make a movie out of this and to keep it still his artwork. So what we would do is we would have Daxiong draw storyboards for a shot, or for a scene. He would draw some storyboards, and then we would build it in 3D software, but we would just build like a box where a building is going to be, and some lines where the streets were going to be, and some outline where the skyline would be. And then in the 3D software, we would take images from different camera angles, and we would print those out. And so we would hand Daxiong just a blank sheet of paper, and it would just have some outlines of where a building's going to be, but no details. And then he would draw everything straight from his pen. So because he was drawing all of the detail himself, and he was doing it from different camera angles, then we could scan all of his work and drape it onto the different 2D surfaces in the 3D software. And once you do that, then you can move a camera in the 3D software through the space, and you can get perspective. When you go around objects, when you look this way, you have the 3D perspective. But everything you're looking at is straight from his pen because it's right from his pen, and we've draped it onto these surfaces. So if you see the red taxi cabs or the street trolley in the childhood memories, if you look closely, you can see marker strokes because he even colored them by hand, and we just draped them onto the 3D surfaces. So the answer about the style is just that we tried to just keep it Daxiong style. Whatever he felt, it felt like his hometown, we tried to use that.
这是一个很好的问题，让我觉得这是一个学校的课堂在研究艺术，而且这是我最愿意聊的一个话题。这个话里面，它最直接的问题就是说，我的画有没有受到日本漫画的影响？其实我觉得我们的文化一直在互相的影响着，尤其在当今这个一个世界越来越小，无论是日本文化、中国文化、美国文化，大家在逐渐的交融在一起。你说我完全没有日本的影子是不可能的。尤其是日本漫画是个非常发达的国家。在我少年时代也会去看《圣斗士星矢》、看《Dragon Ball》、包括现在看这个《鬼灭之刃》Demon Slayer 啊。如果我要是像他们一样有那些超能力的话，我想我就不需要去跟他们做差不多这样的事情了。但是遗憾的是，我不是超级赛亚人。在最初的时候，我喜欢画画，我觉得画画是一个很美好的东西，它可以给我带来很多美好的梦想。但是今天当我们坐在这里看这部电影的时候，我才意识到其实漫画也是一种超级能力，所以我想我们每个人都有这种超级能力。
I mean, I take inspiration from the individuals in this film because they understood they were obviously facing a struggle with the Communist Party who was persecuting them, and they wanted the freedom to practice their beliefs. They understood that the core issue was understanding. It was that the people knew the truth. That's why they risked their lives just to broadcast a home video message to counter the government's lies. The understanding was actually the core issue in order to resolve situation. So my wife, her father was an official in China. He knew that Falun Gong was innocent and that the persecution was wrong. But he felt he could not talk about it at home because my wife might say something, get herself into trouble. So he didn't say those things when they were inside China. Only when he came outside of China was he able to freely express his sympathy and concern for Falun Gong practitioners. Many Chinese people are like this. If they had the freedom to say what they really thought, if they had the ability of Falun Gong practitioners could communicate to them what they're really about and what they're suffering, the persecution in China couldn't sustain. It's based on lies, which is why I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is speak. So when it comes to the issues of the organ harvesting atrocities that are there, talking about these things, letting people know what's going on. Sessions like we have tonight with this film, we can do more screenings. We can screen if you have a city where you feel like, hey, this film should play there. I appreciate the member of parliament who spoke earlier mentioned we should have a screening in Hiroshima. I think that would be wonderful. The more that people know about this, the more we remove the power that they have, because the whole persecution and everything they're able to do exists because people can't speak the truth and they don't know what's happening.
我简短的说一点其实我们不是一定要对抗什么政府，我们其实主要是对抗的是一种谎言。中国最大的武器就是对它的媒体和防火墙。我想这个问题在20年前，这些插播的人他们都面临同样的问题，他们可能在中国的环境下面对的是更多的是这种恐惧和压力。我深刻的理解他们，但是我也理解他们为什么能够继续走下来，因为他们是满怀着对这个国家、对这些人民的爱，所以他们敢于付出这种勇气。那么，我相信能够击败中共的，能够击败这种丑恶的，一定是我们人性中的善良和宽容，把它传递给更多的被蒙蔽的中国人和世界上的人，才是最大的武器。
ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます。